Hi everyone and welcome to this tutorial, where we're going to see how we can move a character in Unreal Engine 5 with the enhanced input system. We're going to do everything in C++. And for that I've just created a blank C++ project, so we can start from it. The first thing we want to do is open Visual Studio, and yes, for this tutorial I'm going to use Visual Studio 2022. So let's open it and let's check the .build.cs file, just to make sure that we've got enhanced inputs inside. As soon as we've got it, we're ready to continue. So let's go back to Unreal and let's go to the project settings. Let's go to the project settings and let's go inside. It's in engine. No, it's not over here. It will be in input. Yep, it's in inputs. Alright, let's check for the default classes. They need to be enhanced player inputs, and for the second one it needs to be enhanced input component. Just for the record, I'm using the lasted version of Unreal the time I'm recording this video, which is 5.4.4. Okay, so we're ready to start. The first thing I want to do quickly is just to create a map. So I'm going to create a new folder for it and a new level. Just going to name it main world. Save it. Assign it as the base map, so we can have something to work on. And I'm going to quickly create a light environment for it. So window, environment light mixer, and let's create everything. And I'm quickly going to put some ground and everything. I'll be back in a second. Alright, I'm back. So I've added some elements from the starter content, so we can have some visual representation to see if we're going fast, slowly, etc. We can have visual elements to see where we are in the world. Okay, so now that this is done, we can start to create the code and everything for the movement to happen. The first thing I'm going to do is to create a character that we can use. We're not going to use a blueprint, like I said. We're going to do everything in C++. So let's create a new element. Since we haven't created any C++ element for the moment, we need to create one by going inside Tools, New C++ class, and I'm going to choose a character. I'm going to name it simply main character. I'm going to create a folder over here. Yeah, looks like we don't have anything, so I'm going to create a public and a private folder. And inside the public one I'm going to create a second one that I'm going to name character. Okay, everything seems in order, so let's go, let's create it. Okay, it looks like Unreal is done, so I'm going to close it, close Unreal as well. Yes, save this. And since we created a new C++ class, we might need to reload our solution, so I'm going to close it and quickly open it again. Okay, we've got our new class inside. We're not going to create anything inside for the moment. We can just get rid of some stuff. So I'm not going to use any of those, so we can get rid of this. And I'm not going to use the constructor as well. Oh, actually, yes, I am. So I don't need for this to tick. Oh, and I'm also not going to need the begin play. We can get rid of everything. And for the CPP, yeah, let's get rid of it as well. And let's set P can never tick to false, yes. I'm also going to add abstract over here, because I don't want to be able to use it directly. I want to create a blueprint out of this and then use it. So let's compile and let's create our blueprint. Okay, looks like we're finally back on Unreal. Inside my content folder I'm going to create a new one that I'm going to name character, and I'm going to create a blueprint out of what we've just created. So in all class let's search for main character. Okay, and I'm simply going to name my blueprint BP underscore main character. Let's just quickly open it and save it. Since we want to use it in our map, we need to create a game mode for that. So in my content, I'm going to create another folder named game mode, and I'm going to create a game mode inside. So blueprint class, game mode base, and I'm going to name it main game mode. Alright, now inside our game mode we can update the default pawn class over here and select our BP main character. Okay, and now we need to apply it. So let's go back to our scene, and over here let's look for game mode. We want to update the game mode, so it's going to be our main game mode. We can save, and I'm also quickly going to add a BP before this. Yep. And I need to update this as well. Okay. The second thing we need to create before being able to start coding is a controller. For that, we also need to create a new C++ class. So let's go. We don't... Yeah, a player controller. Yeah, we have it. We have one over here. So let's go. I'm going to name mine main player controller. I'm going to put it inside controller class. Alright, let's create it. Okay, live coding is done, so I can open my solution over here, sorry, and yeah, you need to reload everything. So let's wait for it. Looks like we're done. We can see the controller and the character. Okay. We also want to add abstract over here. Let's launch Unreal. Okay, we're back on it. Now we can create a new folder, and I'm going to name controller, and I'm going to create my new main controller inside. I'm creating so far one folder for each element. I might be picky, it's just the way I'm used to do things. Because I can find myself having several controller or several character or everything in my projects. Anyway, let's select our main player controller. And I'm going to name it simply BP underscore main player controller. Okay, save it. And we want to use it in the game mode. So open your game mode, and inside the player controller class over here, player controller class, select BP main player controller. If I wasn't using abstract, I will be able to see over here, in addition to my BP main player controller, main player controller. And it's not ideal. I want to use the one in Blueprint, since we're going to add several information inside it that we need to set up in Blueprint. So abstract is useful for that. Anyway, everything seems to be ready on this side, so let's continue. We need to create a new folder one more time. We're going to name this one input. And we can right click and see over here we've got input action, input mapping context, and we're going to use both of those things in order to create our movement for the player. I'm going to start by creating an input action. So an input action basically is a link between your code, the code of your project, and the enhanced input system. This will help to trigger function inside the code as soon as you will hit a key. Inside this we can specify several things. Let's name this one IA for input action underscore and movements. We're going to move a character in this one. Alright, let's open it so we can see we have several things inside. But for the moment the most important one will be the value type. This is what the input is going to return you. Is it going to be a simple boolean? Is it pressed or not? It can be a an axis 1D, you can think of a trigger on a gamepad. The more you press the trigger, the more the value is going to be close to 1, and if you don't press it at all, it's going to be 0. Or an axis 2D. An axis 2D will be a stick, for example. Is it fully in the up side, left side, down side, right side, etc. For the movement, we're going to use this. We're going to use an axis 2D. We can save, and now we can go and see the other thing, which is the input mapping context. Same thing, right click, inside input, select the input mapping context. So I'm going to name this one EMC for input mapping context underscore main. Okay, so the input mapping context is a collection of input actions. We can add mappings over here, and each mapping will be an input action. So far we only have one. So as soon as we select our input action, we can describe how this input action is going to be called. For that I mean which key we're going to use it in order to call it, and how we're going to call it. Let's say that we want the player to move forward. As long as the player is going to maintain the W key, we need the player to move forward. But for the jump, it will not be the same thing. We want to jump as soon as the player pressed the spacebar. But if we maintain the spacebar, we don't want to jump indefinitely. We want to wait for the player to release and press again the spacebar. We can indicate all of those things inside it. And also, one other thing to have in mind is you can superpose the input mapping context. So you can have one that you're going to use every time for walking, and let's say that you're playing a GTA game, and as soon as the player is going to get inside a car, you might want to rebind some mappings. The spacebar can be used for jumping when you're going to be on foot, but as soon as you enter a car, the spacebar can be used for something else, like honking maybe. So with this, you can use a priority system with input mapping context to indicate which input mapping context should have a higher priority than the other one to consume those keys. For the movements, let's create all of the keys we need inside. We're going to need 4. I'm using another T keyboard, so I'm going to use Z, Q, and S and D for the movements. But if you've got a normal keyboard, you can just use WASD. So we can select the key value by just clicking over here, and I'm going to press Z, S, Q, and D. Let's open this. We can see we can select several things, like I talked before, triggers. So for the trigger, we're going to indicate how the key should be called. Should it be called when we press the trigger, when we maintain the trigger, or when we release the trigger? For the movement, we want them to be called as long as the key is maintained. And we want to call the input on down. This means that as long as the key is down, we're going to call the input. We can see that we have several other things like pressed, release, tap, hold, stuff like that. But yeah, we're just going to use down for all of those ones. So let's select them. And now we can see we have another thing to work with, which is the modifier. This will modify the value that it's going to be sent. For the movements, we're using an F vector 2D, so we'll have 2 dimensions, X and Y. But right now, if we press any of those keys, we're only going to find ourselves with 2 results. Either X equal 1 if we're pressing any of the key, or 0 if we aren't pressing anything. This is not going to work for us. What we should do is having like X equal 1 if we press the Z key, X equal minus 1 if we press the S key, Y equal 1 if we press the D key, and Y equal minus 1 if we press the Q key. So let's modify it. For the basic movements, for going forward, we're not going to need any modifiers, so I can get rid of it. But if we want to move backward, we want to send minus 1 instead of 1, so we're going to add a modifier. That's going to be negate. This will, well, negate the value, as it say. We can save. And for Q and D, we need to send the value into the Y coordinates. For that, we need to add 2 modifiers. For each, we need to add the swivel input axis value. This is the order that is going to be shift. We can stick with the basic one. And we can add it to the D as well. So, over here. I want the Y value to be at -1 when we're going to press Q. I can add another modifier over here, which is going to be negate. So far, pressing Z will have x equal 1, pressing S will have x equal minus 1, pressing Q will have y equal minus 1, and pressing D will have y equal 1. Okay, we're going to have all the information that we need to move the player. So now we need to indicate this information inside the player controller and call the corresponding functions. So let's go back to the code and let's start to code it. We're going to use for that the main player controller over here. The first thing we need is to add reference to the inputs. So we're going to use t-object pointer, Unreal Engine pointer system. So no, not t-object key, sorry, t-object pointer. And the class we're going to use will be simply uInput action with a capital A, sorry. So for the moment we're only going to have one. So IA for input action underscore movement. Oh, I won't even need the underscore over here. Let's just say IA movement. And since we're going to need to update this value inside the blueprints, let's make this a new property. So edit anywhere, and I'm going to put this inside an input category. And we're also going to need to use the input mapping context. So I can copy and paste this and change the class. For the input mapping context, it will be input mapping context.h. Yeah, we're going to need this one, but I also need the class here, uInput mapping context. Okay. I'm going to name this one EMC main for main input mapping context. Or main EMC will be more appropriate. Main, sorry, EMC. Okay, now in order to use those values, we need to apply them to the input action. For that, we need to override a function that already exists inside the player controller. This function will be setUpInputComponent. It's going to be called automatically as soon as the game will start. So we can look for it, maybe with a Control F. SetUpInputComponent. Okay, so up. And this is a protected function. So in my main player controller, let's add a protected over here. And let's override this. Okay, before starting to do anything, we're going to need to use several includes. So we're going to need to use the include for the input action and the input mapping context. So for the input action, I think I've just had it before. Yeah, I'm going to look back for it anyway. So input action .cpp, I can just take this and I'm good. And for the second one, it's going to be input mapping context. If you don't know how to do this, you can just press Ctrl and comma, and then you can look for the name of the class you want. And since I'm looking for a file, I can just write f points and then input mapping context, and I'm going to have all the files that contain this name. This is really handy and quick in order to find files, so you can get quickly the include. Alright, now I think we can finally populate this function. So first, before doing anything, let's call the super on it, or nothing will work. The first thing we need to do is to get the enhanced input subsystem, so we can apply our input mapping context on it, and then bind all our input action with functions. So, first thing, get the player subsystem, the enhanced input player subsystem. The class for this will be enhanced input local player subsystem. Yeah, this one. So let's take the include for it. And I also want to have the name of the class. So I'm going to name this, well, enhanced input subsystem. Oh, and this needs to be a pointer, of course. So to get this, we need to use a function from the local player. I think we don't have to use any include for that. So local player get subsystem, and the subsystem we want to use is of course the enhanced input local player subsystem. So we can just copy and paste this. Oops. And this function needs the local player, so get local player. Yep, this one. Okay, just make sure that we've got it. So quickly check this pointer. Then we want to apply the input mapping context. We never know what could happen before, so let's clear before doing it. So clear and apply EMC. We can select it, and the first thing we want to call is clear all mapping. Exactly. The second thing will be to apply our input mapping context, so it will be add mapping context. The priority will be 0 for it, and the name was main EMC. Yes. Okay, now the input mapping context is applied. It will call the corresponding input action as soon as we're going to press the right keys. So we can now bind action and bind function on it. But for that we need to create a function first. Let's go back quickly to the main player controller. We're going to create a move function. Alright, there we go, void move. But we need to address something else. If we're using just a Boolean value for the movement, we will not need to add anything inside. The value is just going to be called as soon as we're going to press the trigger. But this, we're going to call the same function if we press Z, Q, S or D. So for this we need to add a struct inside. And the struct that the enhanced input system will send us is an input action value. F input action value. This of course is going to be const. So const struct, and it's also going to be a reference. And I'm going to name this value in input action value. Okay, so let's bind the move function to the enhanced input system. For that we need to use the input component. But if we're using the input component just like that to bind actions, it will not work for the moment, because this only works with the old way to use input with Unreal. We're using the new way with the enhanced input system, so we need to cast the input component so we can use the new enhanced input system. And in order to cast it, we need to create a variable of it, so enhanced input component, and I don't have any reference on it. Let's quickly look for it. So enhanced input, input component. Perfect, I've got the include. Let's add the include on top over here. And it still doesn't find it, so let's go back, and I'm just going to copy and paste this. Let's not waste any more time. Yeah, of course. I'm going to name this one enhanced inputs, simply as that. So like I said, we're going to cast the input component. Let's make sure that everything went well. So if we don't have anything, let's return. Perfect. Now we've got the enhanced input system. We can use, I'm even going to rename it enhanced input component. Okay, in order to use this, we can use the bind action function. And now you can see that the bind action use input action. It wasn't the case with the input component before it was cast. So anyway, the thing needs an input action. We only have one for the moment, so it's simple. It's going to be input action movement. Trigger events. Well, we can see what we have inside this enumeration. Cancel, complete, ongoing, started, trigger. Trigger will do it. So we're good with that. And the last thing, the function. No, the object before, sorry. Well, the object, the player controller will be enough. And the function name. So the function name, we're just going to copy and paste this. The class and the function. And also, we're going to send the address of it. Okay, so this looks good. I'm going to add some comments. Bind actions. And over here, get enhanced input comp. Okay, cool. Now the move function will be called as soon as we're going to press the Z, Q, S and D key. But we need to see what's going to happen. So I'm going to use a log for it. So UE log temp log text, and inside I want to print the current value sent. So I'm going to write current input value and I'm going to print something. But in order to print something, we need to see what we can do with this and how we can get the f vector 2D that we've just selected before. Let's create a value for it. So it's going to be a const f vector 2D, since we've chosen it to be a vector. F vector 2D. I'm going to name it, well, movement. And in order to use it, we need to get it that way and indicate the type that we're looking for. So the type will be f vector 2D. And this is it. This is how you can get the value from an input action value from this struct. So if the value was a float, we can just replace it with floats. If it was an f vector 3D, we can replace it with f vector 3D, etc. You get it. So let's check the value that is being sent to us. So let's do something quick. There is toString function inside. That's going to be really handy. And also, since we're using the UE log thing, we need to send a pointer for this. Okay, now we can compile and try to use the W, S and D key, and we should see the input value being print. So let's go back to Unreal and let's quickly compile everything with the live coding. Okay, everything went smoothly, so we can open the controller, because so far we haven't sent any value yet. We haven't sent anything inside the controller. So I want to send the main EMC and I want to send the input action movement. Compile, save, and let's go. And if I press Z, yeah, you can see the X value is 1. If I press S, X value is -1. If I press D, Y value is 1. And if I press Q, Y value is -1. So far so good. We can go back on it to the code and send this value inside the character in order to move it. So in order to move the character, we need to have a reference on it. We could use Unreal function like getPlayerCharacter, but this will not be very handy nor very efficient. We already have a function inside the player controller. If we go back to a player controller, there is a function named setPawn. And same thing as the other function, setUpInputComponent. This is being called at the beginning, after the begin play, as soon as we start the game. So we can use this function to get a reference to the pawn. So let's copy and override it. Main player controller over here. I didn't check, but I think, no, this is a public function, so let's not mess everything. Public, override. Let's call the super first. Super set pawn. Okay. I don't need this anymore. Yeah, this, so we've called the function, but we still need to get a reference to the pawn. And we want to get a reference to the character that we've created before, so I'm going to get this include over here, because I'm actually going to use it, and I'm going to get the name of my class and create a pointer for it. Yeah, this is my way of doing things, by the way. Always separate the values and the functions. So I'm going to create an object pointer for it. T object pointer for my pawn. And I'm going to name this one, well, simply character. Okay, and I want the character to be set as soon as we call the setPawn function. So of course we're going to need to cast this. And we also need to use the correct class, for the cast, which is a main character. Cool. Now we've got the reference to the character, and we've got everything that's being called appropriately when we're pressing the Z, Q, S, and D keys. So we can. Oh, I can't close this function. Yeah, sorry. So we can use the character reference for it. Before doing anything, just make sure that it's actually set. So if we don't have any reference to the character, let's simply return, because we don't need to do anything else. Oh, and we won't be able to do anything else actually. And second thing, for the character we can call the function add movement input, and we can add a movement in its forward direction and in its right direction. So the forward direction, we're going to use it if we press the forward or backward key, and if we're going to use the right direction if we press the right or left key. So we need to, so in order to call the right function at the right time, the right direction at the right time, we need to check the movement. So if my movement has a coordinate in x that isn't 0, it means that there is a movement that's happening in the forward direction. So let's go for it. Get actor forward vector. Yes. The scale value will actually simply be the x value. And we don't need to configure the last entry. We can quickly copy and paste this. We don't want to use an else if, because if the player is going to move forward, he might move on the right or on the left. One thing should not exclude the other. But we need to check the right coordinates for it. So let's check the y coordinates. So if the y coordinates isn't 0, we're going to move this time in the get actor, oh, sorry for the caps lock, get actor right vector. And we're going to send the movement dot y. Okay, this looks good. We can compile and quickly check, and everything should run smoothly. Okay, everything went well. We can try. Yes, if I press my forward, backward, right, left key, everything is running smoothly. But if I move my mouse, you can see it, but trust me, I'm moving my mouth. Nothing is moving for the moment, because we haven't added anything for the camera. So we've got half of it. Now let's go for the camera. In order to use the camera, we can't use the input action movement, because since we're going to use a different key, this will not work. We will need to create a new input action for it. So let's go and let's create a new, or we can actually duplicate it. And I'm going to name it look. We can duplicate it because we're going to use the mouse direction. And for this, it's also going to be a vector 2D, so this works. Now that we've got our new input action, we can add it inside the input mapping context. So let's go. Let's add the input action look. And for that, now not the left mouse button, sorry. But if I press mouse, we've got mouse X, Y to the axis. This is exactly what we need. We don't have to configure anything else over here. Okay, everything is ready on Unreal site. Now let's go back to the code. First thing first, we need to have a new reference for it, for the input action. So let's copy and paste this. And I'm going to name in this one input action look. And same thing for move function. I'm going to create a new function named look. Alright, let's create it. I can close this, and I can also close the log thing because we're not going to use it anymore. I'm going to copy and paste the first line over here and simply rename the f vector to d on look. And since I've added a new function and a new input action, we need to duplicate this. So the new input action will be look, and the new function that's going to be called will be, well, look as well. Now our new function and our new input is bind. So let's see how we can use it. In order to move our camera, we need to call the function inside a character. We have two functions that we can call. The first one is, so add controller yaw input and pitch input. We're going to start with the x coordinates. So the x will be the yaw. So same as before. If the x coordinate on the look isn't 0, oh, we don't actually have to write everything down. Yeah, sorry. We can erase this. This is going to be done automatically. Okay, let's close this. And so, if look.x isn't 0, let's call add controller yaw input, and if look.y isn't 0, let's call add controller pitch input. And same as before, we're going to send the value. So for this is going to be look.x, and for this look.y. And I can launch my solution and try it. Okay, I'm back on Unreal. Oh, it has opened everything on this side. Weird. Okay, let's just give me a second to put everything back on place. Okay, so if I try to now move, oh. So yeah, let's just make sure that the input action is set on the controller. Input action look, compile, save. Now we can try. And okay, everything is working. There's just something weird. It's just that the y coordinate, so the up and down, is reversed. This is actually quite simple to explain. If I drag my mouse away from me, like all the way from the bottom to the top of my screen, I'm going to add value to the pitch input. And adding value mean, well, basically go that way, go downstairs. You can see I'm adding value 20, 30, 40, etc. And if I take the mouse and if I drag it in to my direction, so if I drag it all on the way from the top to the bottom, I'm going to subtract value, -10, -20, -30, etc. There is a simple fix for it, really simple. Let's go back on it and let's hide the negate in front of it. Let's compile and quickly try again. Okay, it took a second. Okay, everything is much more normal for me. If you used to play with like reverse control, I'm not judging you, but if it's not the case, this is coming from this. Okay, so now we can move, we can look, we can add several more things. We're going to add a jump, a sprint, a crouch, and everything. So let's continue. Oh, actually, before even continuing, some people might experience motion sickness because you can see that we don't have any crosshair in front of the... not in front, sorry. We don't have any crosshair in the middle of the screen. We can create a small HUD and adding a small point in the center of the screen. Let's do that quickly. So for doing this, we need to create first an HUD. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to name it UI. And I'm going to create a new HUD. Going to name it pp_main HUD. Let's open it. I'm going to save it, and I'm going to use it in the game mode. HUD class, select pp main HUD. So we are halfway there. We need to create something else. We need to create a new widget blueprint. So for this, we're not going to use blueprint class. We're going to user interface widget blueprint. A simple user widget will do it. And I'm going to name it WBP for widget blueprint underscore. I'm going to name it like simply crosshair. So for that, I'm going to create a canvas and an image inside. The image is really over here, so let's create it. The image will need to be on the center. I'm really going to do something like super quick and super easy. It's not anything really fancy, but as long as it works, it's fine for me. So the thing would be quite small, like 10 and 10 maybe. I can zoom a bit inside it. Yeah, I want it to be really on the center, so I need to update the position in X and Y value. So half of it, -5 and -5. And now I've got a small white cube in the center of the screen. In order to use it, we need to use it inside the main HUD. So inside this, we can go to the event graph. This is actually the only thing that we're going to do inside the event graph. We will still do all the rest in code. So over here, we can create widgets. We're going to select our new class, crosshair. The owning player will be, get player owner. And the second thing will be to add two viewports over here. Okay, compile, save, and now if you press play, I've got a small cube in the center of my screen. It's actually still quite big, I'd say, even though it's still small, but I'm going to reduce the size of it by half, so 5 and 5, so -2.5 and -2.5. Compile, save. Yeah, this is much better. Okay, so this was a quick way to have a crosshair for the center of your screen. It's not really fancy, but as long as it's working, it's fine for me. Okay, let's continue, but before adding the new input that I've talked about, the jump, the crouch and the sprint, let's do something else. Something simple, like being able to update the sensitivity of the crosshair. We can just create two new functions and two new values inside the controller and use them. So let's go back on it. Let's open Visual Studio one more time. And I'm going to create a new subpart, I'd say. So, sensitivity. We can copy and paste this. I'm going to name the category like mouse. So two things, floats. The first thing will be the horizontal sensitivity. I'm going to put it to 1 for the moment. And the second thing will be vertical sensitivity. And for both of those things, I'm going to claim the value. So this is handy. Like, so you want to be sure that no one is going to put 300 or -20 in the sensitivity. This still needs to be reasonable values. So for that, I'm going to use clamp min. So I don't want the value to go below, let's say 10%, and to go above 300%. I will use the same configuration for both. In order to use those things, we can still override other functions from the player controller. There is function named add yaw input and add pitch input. We're going to override both of those functions. Let's go. Those functions are public. So let's go over here. add yaw input override, and the second one was add pitch input override. 1, 2, okay, we're ready to go. So for that, it's simple. We're simply going to call the super. So add yaw input. So the yaw will be for the horizontal sensitivity, and the pitch will be for the vertical sensitivity. So we're going to call the super with the value times horizontal sensitivity. And for this one, we're going to call the add pitch inputs with the value times vertical sensitivity. Okay, that looks good. Let's compile. Everything's alright. Let's go to the main player controller. We've got our new sensitivity. I'm going to put like 0.2 and 3, which is pretty extreme values, so we should see it working right away. Yeah, I'm moving my mouse like in circle and you can see that nothing's normal, so the values are correct. I'm going to stick to maybe 0.9. Yeah, 0.9 is great. It's smoother for me, so I'm going to stick to those values. Okay, let's continue. The next thing we're going to do will be to make the character jump. Luckily for us, there is already a jump function inside the player, so we can use it. Inside the character, sorry. Let's create a new input action first. It's over here in inputs, and I'm going to name this one input action jump underscore jump, sorry. Okay, and this will be a boolean. We don't need anything else. We don't need to know if the trigger is more or less pressed. We're simply going to use the space key, so boolean is fine. Alright, let's save it, and let's quickly check something inside the character. If we open the full blueprint editor and check, we have a character movement. And over here, if we look for jump, we can see that we've got a lot of things actually present for the jump, like the velocity, air control, stuff like that, a lot of values that we can play on. We're not going to tweak anything over here, it's not the point of it, but it's just to show you that inside the character we already have something to make the character jump. So we're going to use this. Alright, let's go to the code, and first thing first, let's add a new jump input action. So over here, input action jump, and let's add a new jump function. For the jump function, we're not going to use the struct, so we can erase it. Let's quickly rename this void jump. Let's create a function. There is a function inside the character that's simply called jump that we can use. So if we've got the reference to the character, let's call the jump function, and this is going to call all the jump element inside the character movement component. So we just need to do this, and also we need to, of course, bind the function over here. So for the input action jump, let's bind the jump function. Okay, everything seems good on the coding side of things, so let's compile and make sure that everything's alright. Okay, we're all done on it. So the input action jump is create. So and now we can use it inside the input mapping context. So let's create a new entry for it. That's going to be input action jump. We're going to use the spacebar, of course, and the trigger will be, well, pressed. We only want to make the character jump as soon as we press the spacebar. For the Z key, we were using the down, and we don't want to call the jump function if we're maintaining the spacebar. We only want to call it once. We want the player to release and press again the spacebar to call it a second time. So that's why we're going to use pressed. Now we can save this, and we can add inside the main, not the main character, but the main controller, the new input action. So input action jump, let's add it over here, compile, save, and let's try it. And yeah, we can jump. That was really quick and easy to add. And again, if you want to tweak the jump, you can use the character movement component inside the character. Okay, jump is great, and we can also add several other things. Let's add a sprint. So again, same thing as before. Let's add first a new input action. So we can duplicate this one because it's also going to be a boolean that we're going to use inside. I'm going to name this one sprint. Right, let's save it. And so let's add a new mapping over here that's going to be sprint. I'm going to use the key, well, left shift. Let's save it. And I want this to be pressed as soon as we, well, as soon as the key is down. As long as I'm going to press the shift key, I want to call the function. Okay, everything seems to be ready on this side of things. Oh, the input action jump isn't here anymore. Weird. We can go to the code. So, sorry, okay. First thing first, we need a new reference for the new input action. So input action sprint, and we're going to need a new sprint function. It's not going to be like the jump. We're going to use the struct. So let's call this one sprint. Okay, let's bind it over here. So again, just duplicate this, input action sprint, and let's call the sprint function. Before doing everything that we need inside the sprint function, let's quickly go back on Unreal and let's open the character. And if we go again in the character movement components, and if we write sprint, well, we don't have anything. So we're going to need to use something else. In the movement walking, we've got over here maximum walk speed. We're going to use this. So as long as we're going to press the sprint key, we're going to increase this value. And if we release the key, we're going to set back this value to its default value. So for that, we need to create several more things in the coding section. So for the sprints, I'm going to create a new small part over here. I want first to save the default value. So default, it was max walk speed. And I want to expose a new value. So I don't need to clamp it really. Yeah, I'm just going to clamp it for the min. I don't want the value to go below 0. And I'm going to put this inside the sprint section. Let's create a new float for this. Sprint max walk speed, and I'm going to double it. I think it was 600, so let's go for 1200. Oops, sorry, 1200. And alright, let's use it. So let's go over here. Okay, so for the sprint section, we can't use a function inside the character like before. We need to use something else. We will need this time to use a reference to the character movement components. So over here, yeah, in the setPoint function, as soon as we've got the character, we're going to get the character movement components. So let's look for the name of the class. So character movement components. All right. So this will be the include, and well, I'd like to have the name of the class, please. Not a struct. Over here, character movement components. I want to have a reference for it. So let's duplicate this. I want to have a new reference for my character movement component. We're going to get it inside the setPoint. So inside the setPoint, if we've got the character, let's get its components. So we're going to use the find component by class. Oops, over here for the character movement component, and we're going to apply this value inside it, inside our character movement component. Okay, now for the sprint thing, for the sprint function. if we don't have this reference, let's return. We're not going to be able to apply it. Second thing, we will need to get the value that is being sent to us. This will not be an f-vector2d, but simply a boolean. Is it pressed or is it not pressed? So I'm simply going to name it, well, b sprint, b for boolean. So if we're pressing the sprint button, let's increase the value, let's increase the max wall speed, and if it's not the case, let's put it back to its default value. So, well, character movement component, max walk speed, let's put it to the sprint max wall speed, and if we're not pressing it, let's put it to the default max wall speed. Now we haven't set this value yet, so as soon as we've got the reference to the character movement component over here, so if the reference is set correctly, let's get this value. So simply a max walk speed. Okay, we can compile, assign the new input action inside the controller, and everything should work. Okay, everything is set on the coding side of things. Now let's go back to the main player controller. Let's add the input action sprint over here. Compile, save. I'm going to stick with the 1200. And let's try it. Yeah, you can see the difference, I think. But yeah, there is something weird. It looks like it's not recognizing the fact that I've released the sprint key. Something might be missing somewhere. Yeah, something is definitely missing over here. So we don't want to press this thing as long as it's down. I made a mistake over here. We want to use it when it's going to be pressed and released. So let's save, and this should be better. Yeah, definitely. This was a mistake on my part, sorry. So you can see over here, I'm pressing it, I'm not pressing it, I'm pressing it, I'm not pressing it. You got it. So yeah, sorry for that. So in the input mapping context, make sure to change the trigger. Make sure to use pressed and released instead of hold. This was a mistake on my part. I'm going to add something else, it's just that sprinting indefinitely doesn't seem really normal. I'm going to add a small timer for this. So for that, let's go back inside the coding part. I'm going to add another value over here, which will be, well, float max sprint time. I'm going to put like 3 seconds. It looks more than enough to test it. I'm not going to take a value to see if we have passed the timer or not. I'm going to use a timer. So f timer handle, and I'm going to name mine, well, sprint timer handle. And I'm going to create a function that's going to be called when the timer will be off. I'm going to name it, well, on sprint timer end. Simple as that. Okay, first thing first, let's set the timer over here. So over here, let's launch the timer, and after that, over here, let's, well, clear the timer. In order to do both of those things, we will need the timer manager. So let's over here just check if sprint input is pressed, and I'm going to add something on top of it. Get timer manager. So the timer manager is simply, well, f timer manager. I'm going to name the value timer manager, and to get it, we can get it from the character. So character get world timer manager, sorry. And looks like we're good to go. So order to launch the timer, well, I'm going to clear it to make sure that my timer isn't already running. So clear the sprint, maybe? Sprint timer handle, yes. And second thing, not clear timer, but set timer. So for that, we first need the timer, sprint timer handle. Then we need, I'm not going to use this one. I will need to send the reference to, we're not going to use this one, we're going to use another one. Yeah, we're going to use this one. So let's send an object, this. Then let's send the function that we want to use. It's the function that we've created just before on sprint timer end. Let's go. Then let's send the timer. So the time, the name of the variable was max sprint time over here. So max sprint time. And the last thing will be false because we don't want to repeat the timer indefinitely. And for the second part, for the else, well, if we release the sprint button, let's just clear the timer. Simple and easy. Now what we're going to do if the sprint timer is over? Well, same thing as before. Let's get the timer manager and let's clear the timer. Oops. And then, well, let's just set back the max full speed to its default value, like we're doing over here. Okay, well, this should be enough. Let's go back to Unreal, let's compile. Oh, good. Let's check the player controller. We've got something new over here. Max sprint time, 3 seconds. Let's try it. So, 1, 2, 3, and I'm working again. And if I press release, yeah, everything is working smoothly. Okay, cool. Cool. The last thing we can add will be a crouch. Like for the jump, we've got value that we can use for the crouch inside the character movement component. If we're looking for crouch over here, well, we have crouch half 8, that will be the size of the player's capsule when we're going to be crouch. Max full speed when crouch, we're not going to use this and change it. But we need to take this value, can crouch. Let's set it to true. Compile, save, and now we're ready to crouch. So same thing as for the jump, same thing as for the sprint. We can duplicate it because we're going to use a boolean. So in production, crouch, save. Let's quickly, before doing anything else, add it inside the input mapping context. So in production, crouch. I'm going to put it inside my left control key. And I want it to be called, if same thing as for the sprint actually. So if the key is pressed and if the key is released, I want to call the function. Let's save, and now let's go back to the code. So as always, let's add the in production. Over here, in production crouch. And let's add a new function. I'm going to name this one, well, crouch. Alright, let's create it. First thing first, let's add the function, let's bind the function, sorry, over here. In production, crouch. Inside the crouch function. Oops. And for the crouch, same thing as for the sprint. We need the character movement component. And it's also going to be a boolean, so we can copy and paste this first bracket and the value over here. I'm going to rename it, of course. It's not going to be B sprint, but B crouch. So if crouch value is pressed, well, we simply have a function named inside the character movement component named crouch. I'm thinking, but the crouch function actually might be inside the character. Yeah, it is. So let's not use the character movement component. Let's use simply the character over here. So crouch, and if the key isn't pressed, well, there is uncrouch. And this is it. Let's compile. Okay, Unreal's happy. So let's go to the main player controller. Let's add the input action crouch. Compile, save. Let's go to the scene and let's try it. So yeah, it's working. It's not smooth at all. It's brutal. It's actually a bit ugly, but hey, it's working. So this was the last thing for this lesson. We've seen how to move the character, how to move the camera, how to jump, how to sprint, and how to crouch. Everything using the new enhanced input system of Unreal. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any question regarding it, feel free to ask anything in the comments and let me know what you thought about it.